The Miami Dolphins introduced us to their new leadership on Thursday, and I'm reacting to some things that I noticed here on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Special thank you to each and every one of you who have helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Locked On NFL. Get $50 on lineups after you play your first $5 lineups. And let's get into it. Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley introductory press conference. We went a full 60 minutes today. And got to hear from Stephen Ross, got to hear from Jon-Eric Sullivan with an opening statement, got to hear from Jeff Hafley from an opening statement. They fielded a bunch of questions. I have a whole bunch of notes. I got a whole mounted TV here as my second monitor with notes on timestamps from the transcripts of things that I noticed. But I think first and foremost, you probably start with just kind of the affirmation of some things that you expected and anticipated were going to be a part of the calculus, talking about the cohesiveness and being on the same page as far as player development and how that is a point of emphasis with this regime. And Jon-Eric Sullivan talking about bringing that school of thought from Green Bay to Miami was something that you could use deductive reasoning to kind of figure out why it fit the way that it did. But to hear it from them, obviously, is a different gamut altogether. We've also kind of heard about Jeff Hafley and kind of the demand that he had from other coaches. And he recalled the process of the Dolphins offering him the job and being in the interview in Miami and having another team, which you could use deductive reasoning, was the Las Vegas Raiders, who were meeting with coaching candidates in Miami that night of the national championship game because they had their whole leadership group there in Miami for the Indiana-Miami game. Jeff Hafley said that they were trying to get him to leave his hotel room to come interview while at the hotel to get ready to roll with Miami. But the thing that excited me the most about that part of that story from Jeff Hafley was Jeff Hafley said, I chose to come to Miami first, right? And I reflect on this with talking about players and just the overall protecting the organization and doing what's best for the organization. And there are players, I remember player holdouts in the past 2 years that we've talked about and said, we want players that want to be here, right? And both Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley talked about the prerogative of prioritizing the Miami Dolphins as this was the place that they felt was the right opportunity for them. Jon-Eric Sullivan talked about how the number one thing that stood out to him in his meetings and his conversations with Stephen Ross was whatever you need to win, we are willing to provide it to you. And, in the last couple of weeks, we've talked about how attractive of a GM position this is versus how much of a head coaching position it is. And I thought it was a much more attractive GM position because that element is a body of work that Stephen Ross has built for himself. With the holes and the warts and the concerns that you have with Stephen Ross as an owner, the one thing you could be rest assured, the man would never spare any expense. Like John Hammond, Jurassic Park style, right? Spare no expense. That's the Dolphins. You want to be top 8 in the NFL in budget for cash spending 4 straight years? Done. You got it. We're top 8 in the league in cash spend. We want to upgrade the stadium and host more Super Bowls, but taxpayers are hesitant to foot the bill. I'll pay for it. I'll build the whole Baptist Health Training Complex myself. Right? Spare no expense. And Jon-Eric Sullivan talking about, I've come from a place that was a first-class organization And for me, I wasn't going to leave to just be a general manager, no matter how badly I wanted to be a general manager. And places like this that give you the resources to go after what you feel is appropriate to build a winner makes it an attractive position. And then I think that hire for Miami obviously boosted the appeal for Coach Jeff Hafley, who had a number of teams that were interested in secondary interviews, and it's going to end up being like the ledger's like a half a dozen teams when it's all said and done. We're interested in at least having Jeff Hafley in for a second interview. And when Jeff Hafley says, I chose to come here first, great. Regardless of what processes helped that to be the case, I think it's meaningful to have leadership that chooses to be here, because in the same way of paying players, right? Like, is a player here to get paid the most amount of money, or are they actually invested in the success of the organization because it's a place that they chose for the right reasons? Is that and that's kind of the culture thing that they talked about bringing in young players and taking care of their own and fostering that psychology with players. And it helps them establish a culture because they've come up here and they're invested here, instead of, as Jon-Eric Sullivan talked about it a few days ago or on Sunday when he did his interview with Travis Wingfield, a team full of mercenaries. And that's a dangerous place to be. So if you want to preach the culture of your organization and taking care of your own and building a culture that's focused on those who are invested in the place in which they've come from, having a GM and a head coach that choose to embody that as well by choosing to prioritize the Dolphins as a destination, I think the tonality is off to a good start, right? And we'll get to the football speak and the football psychology and the team building philosophy and all that kind of stuff. Not that a lot of it is stuff that we haven't already kind of touched on, and being able to glean that from Jon-Eric Sullivan, who seemed to be the guy who dominated a lot of the questions in the press conference in the first place. But it's easy to say it, right? Their actions dictated. Jeff Hafley's got 6 teams interested and chose to come to Miami first. That's if to borrow the Mike McDaniel-ism, if I see better than I hear, and I see Jeff Hafley have 6 teams and he chooses to come to Miami first, and I see Jon-Eric Sullivan take 3 GM interviews last year, not choose to not take an offer, and then come back and then pick to come to the Dolphins, I understand the apprehension for fans that want to say, show me. I get it. But that piece of it, they have shown and they have done. And it's a good first step. But that's next for us here on the show. We're going to get into a lot of that, so make sure you guys stick with us. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not just you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets change the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but being able to apply it in a dynamic way, it's something you can now actually take part of live in a market that's powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play-by-play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures and commission merchant and swap firm. NFL season is winding down. Got 3 games left this season. There's nothing like being at the game. If you get a chance, take in the crowd noise, the energy, cheering alongside other fans. You want to make the most of it. Watching from home can be great, but hitting in the stadium hits different when you're watching the game. Frustrating part is always buying tickets, though, when you can deal with the online queues, logins, watching prices change with surprise fees. Game Time app gives the advantage back to fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can pull up Game Time on your phone, find NFL game tickets, and you can get them for as little as $100. They've also got zone deals that can stand out to you. If you want to pick a section, kind of whether you want 50-yard line, you want end zone view, you want upper bowl, you name it. Game Time will pick the seats, and you could save even more. Their tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee, so it gives you real peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, Redeem code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today and get back to being there live. Things that stood out to me, things that I noticed. I'm going to start with this one from Jeff Hafley. He talked about the value of being honest with players. And I remember he did an interview with Adam Brenneman. It was an hour-long interview when he was just getting ready to leave Boston College as the head coach at BC. And he talked and recalled a story about, they were having exit interviews and he was an assistant on somebody's staff and they had a linebacker in who was not going to make it as a player, and kind of having an open dialogue and a conversation with that player. And that was a kind of a formative thing for Jeff Hafley early in his coaching career, and the value of being honest with your players. And I think that's something that stands out to me as being able to have hard conversations. You can kind of look through the lexicon of some of the less happy memories of the Dolphins and Joe Philbin on Hard Knocks, right? And the conversation to cut Chad Ochocinco, right? And that was an uncomfortable conversation that needed honesty and transparency. And I think a lot of people, when they watched that conversation unfold, kind of came away with some more questions and concerns about Joe Philbin than what they had before maybe they watched it. It's probably fair to say, right? I remember, and I can't speak intelligently on this one because it wasn't broadcast to the world, but there was reports with Mike McDaniel and the culture around the team last year about Mike would rather sell you sunshine and rainbows and tell you everything was good. And, if that's a part of their debriefing from that regime and they're looking to correct, and teams usually have a habit of overcorrecting when they go from one end of the spectrum to another with a coach. Jeff Hafley pointing to that being a tangible skill that he has in being open and honest and having open dialogue with players is something that popped to me throughout the course of this hour-long press conference, where you get a chance to meet the power players of this new version of the Miami Dolphins. They did I have it up here on the screen, 4 core values. And it's always interesting to see what gets put up on the graphics inside the building and what's the saying up in the gym or in the trainer's office, or Notre Dame walking out and play like a champion today, or everybody's got to reach up and tap the sign. What are the messaging points? What are the points of emphasis? Not that it tells you anything definitive off the jump, but it's always kind of interesting to see what the core values are. And Jeff Hafley pointed out 4 core values: trust, belief, accountability, and toughness. Those were the 4 mentioned by name core beliefs that Jeff Hafley hopes to invoke on the Miami Dolphins for the culture of his football team here in Miami. Was a part of the lead into that was where he learned to tell players things he's learned throughout his coaching experience was to learn to tell players the truth. But the trust, belief, the power of belief as a team, collective team, accountability, not just with players, but also with coaches. He said here, coaches have to teach here, right? And the coaches will be accountable to each other. And part of that being the ability to have, in theory, those hard conversations. And again, you take everything for face value because you want to see it in practice before you choose to get on either end of the spectrum of whether it works or it doesn't. But this is all just taking inventory on this is what these points of emphasis, this is our starting point. This is setting our expectations. And as it goes from here, we can judge the product whether it meets or does not meet those expectations, with the understanding that in 2026, probably a lot of this is not just going to be what is the result with a win or a loss on Sunday. Well, they can make some personnel moves. They'll make some personnel moves. They'll go into the draft. They'll try to shake things up. Jon-Eric Sullivan was asked by Marcel Louis-Jacques about the quarterback situation. Jon-Eric kind of said he understood the question, but also hasn't had a chance to speak with Tua Tagovailoa yet, so it didn't feel it would be appropriate to get into any kind of details in that regard. But, he kind of got into the quarterback philosophy And what I can tell you about that is it's very different than what you're accustomed to with the Miami Dolphins. The two things that stood out about the Jon-Eric Sullivan quarterback philosophy to me was, number one, if you can help it, don't wait until you have a quarterback or until you need a quarterback to find one, right? And that's been put in practice in Green Bay with the Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers transition, and then subsequently the Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love transition. They've done it twice. Now, you got to hit the first one in the first place, and I know a lot of Dolphins fans are sitting here just SpongeBob in Sandy's bowl at the bottom of the ocean in Bikini Bottom, looking at the glass of water saying, I need it, right? And that glass of water is one quarterback you feel like is in that stratosphere. I get it. But this is where the other half of that conversation comes to life. Jon-Eric Sullivan pretty much said either every year or every other year, this team is going to draft a quarterback. I think I did a short on that not that long ago when people told me in the comments I was stupid. Hope they tell Jon-Eric he's stupid too. I'm not saying you use one in the first round every year, but you got to take some swings at the bat. You got to accept that the reward on, or the return on investment, if you hit relative to the risk, that's going to be different in every draft with every quarterback class, right? It might be appropriate this year in the 4th or 5th round. It might be appropriate next year in the 1st round. It might be appropriate 3 years from now in the 3rd round, maybe the 5th round the year after that. And then once you have a quarterback, you can take less dynamic swings of the bat, but continue to take them like the Packers have done for a while. Because he said the worst thing that happens is you hit on more than one, and then you can make a decision on which one you want to keep. Think about the Philadelphia Eagles and the Jimmy Kempski quarterback factory bit on Twitter. They just churn them out. Oh, this guy looked good. Maybe we'll trade this guy. Oh, this guy looks good and he's young and it can give us a new version of our offense. Maybe we'll move on from Carson Wentz and we'll make Jalen Hurts a starting quarterback. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And some teams do it. The Dolphins have not been one of those football teams. Right? They in the last 15 years, they've taken 2 quarterbacks in the first round, and they've barely touched quarterbacks unless it's in the 7th round. Otherwise, it's Brandon Doughty and Skylar Thompson and Quinn Ewers. That's what you have to show for non-Ryan Tannehill, Tua Tagovailoa quarterback picks since 2009. Respectfully, that sucks. You've given yourself no chance to catch lightning in a bottle. That philosophy's coming to Miami, though. I thought it was interesting you went as far as to say that. If not every year, every other year, draft a quarterback. Great. Let's work up some quarterbacks, right? Let's do some evals. Let's figure out who we like. There was more. There's obviously a lot more with an hour-long press conference to get into than this. But there was a quote that came through. Really only one quote that got me up in the chair and got me as oh, I'm a sucker for that one. What was it? We're going to talk about it next here on the show. Make sure you guys stick with us. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important it is to have a good fit for the jobs that you're seeking to fill. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If you were going to hire somebody for this show, whether it's from my chair or somebody else's, you can go right to Indeed. Be very specific about what you need for the role and find real experience, not just resume buzzwords. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs post directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results by using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get $75 in sponsored jobs credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves. And Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now. Show the show support by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. If you're hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person and connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and get you every deduction they possibly can. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. And if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, file by February 28th. Just take taxes off your plate and get back to living your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. I want to get this quote right. And it was by Jon-Eric Sullivan. And it certainly got me fired up. He talked about the way in which they're going to do things in Miami. And I'm going to read it straight off the Otter AI transcript writer that I had recording while the press conference was going on. We're going to do things one way. And he's talking about Jeff Hafley and kind of the way that he goes about his business. So we're going to do things one way. It's going to be the hard way. And if you're not a part of it or don't want to be a part of it, it doesn't make you a bad human being. But you have to get off the train. It's just going to be an uncomfortable environment for you. That fires me up. Right? And again, I get it. I see better than I hear. You got to go out and do it. But this is a guy who did it the hard way. He was a scout on the road for a decade. That's not like a very particularly luxurious lifestyle. No, I've seen those. I've sat in the press box with those guys. I've been out and I pulled double headers when I worked for my own independent scouting firm for NDT Scouting. And I would go down and I flew down to Tempe and I did a Friday night game in Tucson for Arizona and sat up in the box. And Chris Greer was there that night. And then the following night, I went up and watched Arizona State play and then flew home. And that game on Friday night, that was a Friday night game. That was not it's over and it's lunchtime. It was, I got to get back in my rental car and drive an hour and a half up through the desert at 2 a.m. That's the life you live as a scout. And they put me in the box next to all the NFL scouts for all those games. So I've seen what that lifestyle is like. Working on reports in the box. And then you get in the car and you drive 100 miles to the next place the next day. For 200 days on the road, right? That is the hard way from like a football executive standpoint. Jon-Eric Sullivan lived that. And Jeff Hafley talked about sleeping under his desk for 2 years. Talked about when I came to Pitt, I left a full-time job at Albany, and I told myself for 2 years, I want no regrets. So I'm going to full send. I'm going to send it, and I'm going to leave it all out there, and whatever happens, happens. And he gets a spot on Dave Wannstedt's staff at University of Pitt. And he made it happen. And here he is today, the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. Okay, there are blind spots, and they talked about blind spots as a GM, and they talked about mistakes as a head coach, and they'll make them, but they're going to try to surround themselves by the best people to make sure they don't make the same mistakes twice, or they're self-aware of the blind spots that exist. There's some self-awareness here, right? Like, I'm a first-time GM. He's a first-time head coach. I appreciate self-awareness. I appreciate honesty. But what I appreciate more is the stories of guys like this that they've lived it, right? And they lived it for years and years and years and years. And if they come out and they say, we're going to do things one way, it's going to be the hard way. And if you're not a part of it or don't want to be a part of it, it doesn't make you a bad human being, but you have to get off the train. That's the good stuff for a press conference. That was the quote that won the press conference for me. And your goal is not to win the press conference. I know. And I know we got a lot of skeptics and that we got a lot of people that want to believe but want to see it first. But I believe them when they say it because their resumes indicate that they have walked this walk for a really long time. They talked about, Jeff Hafley talked about kind of pillars of his offensive philosophy or football philosophy. And he talked about running the ball. He talked about, being able to run the ball. And when opposing teams know that we need to run the balls to still have belief to run the football, you take that and you pair that with what Jon-Eric Sullivan has talked about both on Sunday with Travis Wingfield and again in the press conference. He talked about building this thing from the inside out and building up the infrastructure of the team and being able to win and control the line of scrimmage on both sides and having a football team that can compete and contend and can win in any environment against any opponent. That you do that by winning the trenches. So for me, a lot of this focus and conversation around the Miami Dolphins, edge players, maybe a penetration defensive tackle type player, offensive lineman. We got to figure out the right side of the offensive line. Jonas Savai had some significant resources poured into him, deserves a chance to compete for a starting job, but is owed nothing. Owed nothing. I think that's where we start. And to take the the last quote from Jon-Eric Sullivan's introductory statements in the presser today. Let's get to work. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. A lot more reactions to a lot more things as we kind of peel our way through the specific details and explore specific talking points. But just wanted to give my initial reaction right off the cuff for the Dolphins introductory press conference for Jon-Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley. New era, right? Excited for a new era, excited for some healthy change, excited to see what they do with the opportunity and what direction they choose to go. We get you covered every day here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. And I will talk to you all again tomorrow.